a lot of people transition in that way after the COVID. Like I think all of us were confronted with this existential threat and thinking, well, what can I offer that has more impact, that like, instead of, let's say, consulting for example, that, you hear horror stories of, are they worthwhile consultants, all
Yeah,
these things.
totally.
And so what was your search like, going from feed the front line when, restaurants open back up, they don't need you on the ground anymore,
Yeah.
to the search of like, what do I do next? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, and one thing I'll say is that restaurants kind of always need us on the ground. Our goal was never to, be their only source of income, but margins are so razor thin in the restaurant industry that any type of alternative revenue stream that they can get, especially during downtime, you have to hire people to come in at 4 p.m., but your guests don't come in until 5:30. And so what are people doing between then after they're done prepping? So there is actually a great opportunity for restaurants to have these alternative revenue streams, for feeding their neighbors or stuff like that. But for me personally, I think a big piece of it was about having more impact on the world, like especially during a time where things were really scary, and I wasn't a doctor, so I knew I couldn't like help develop a vaccine, but I did know that I could help coordinate the logistics between restaurants and people who need food. um,
Right.
and then the other part was just learning more about the food system and just understanding, um, really how challenged and broken it is across so many different realms. Like first it was restaurants, but then it was food insecurity and food access and the ability to get healthy food or good food and to be able to afford it. And then it was sustainability and like, how is the food that we're growing, being grown, and how is it being transported, and how much of it is being wasted. And I think just my whole world kind of exploded when I started to dig more into the food system.
Right. Yeah, it's quite the mess. I know that like there's even an app here. I don't know if it's in the US. It's called Too Good to Go.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard that?
Yep.
So
ReThink partners
um
with Too Good to Go.
yeah, we'll get into that later because maybe it's kind of part and parcel for what you're doing. And speaking of the food system, like, are you able to walk me through, I don't think we have 5 hours of lecture time, but like what the current food system is, like how it's set up, and maybe you can explain like what it is and what it isn't, and then kind of what your dream is for it to become.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely by no means an expert, but I have been reading a lot about it. I think one thing to preface with is it really does vary, um, country to country, region to region, even city to
Hmm.
city. But I've mostly focused, my research and my readings, on what's going on in the U.S. And one of the biggest themes that you come across when you start to dig in is that, the food system is broken, but that is by design. Like there are people who are benefiting from it. And there's a massive industry that's, predicated around growing, a surplus of corn so that you can turn it into animal feed or hyper processed products or high fructose corn syrup. I mean, the lobbies are so strong, in DC, and the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act, which was recently passed, which had a ton of climate provisions, didn't say anything about eating less meat, is it just goes to show that there are a lot
Yeah.
of people who are benefiting from the broken food system. Um, Today, I would say in the U.S., the food system is just really dominated by kind of capitalism and a lot of capitalist interests. And listen, I worked at Bain. I'm a capitalist as well, but it has taken away a lot of the dignity, the culture, the vitality that should be associated with food, and that should be, associated with kind of this basic human right of healthy, real, good food,
Right.
um, in pursuit of profit is kind of the simplest way to say it.
Right. Well, it's kind of like, I think people like me that live outside of the U.S. So I, raised in Canada. Like my family's background is Italian, and so we've been going to this country for,
Yeah,
for years. And so the idea of socialized medicine and all this stuff, like to not have it is very foreign to me. And
yeah,
the conversations I've had with Americans that see how broken it is, And I think the food system is probably similar, where they say, well, there's a complete conflict of interest if you're trying to get profit out of something that should be benefiting the health and well-being and even the overall wellness of a country. Because if you're pushing people to, on the basic level, consume more and eat more, like that's also not healthy, because people should be eating the amount that they feel satiates them and eating whole foods and things like that. Instead, you have corn syrup and fast food and all these things. But it's interesting how you say, like, well, I'm a capitalist, and because I would consider myself as well. Like I've had e-commerce companies and all these things, and it's like, especially in America, it seems like people are really afraid to say that we think capitalism is totally broken. And so it's nice to hear people that, we're management consultants, we're maybe in finance because that's where they thought they could earn the most. Now, pivoting and saying, like, I want to fix this system that is completely shattered. So regarding food systems, where do you, or like, I was going to say, where do you think is the biggest problem? But it seems like a corporate interest. So where do you think we are hopefully going that that would be better for all of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I feel really galvanized and passionate about is, what those corporate interests have led to is, a huge degradation of the land, and really just some terrible environmental impacts, due to the way that, livestock are grazed, due to monocropping, and monoculture, due to the fact that there's no cover cropping anymore. The soil has been degraded. There's not carbon being sequestered into the soil. And so there's really a huge environmental challenge. And I think I read that the food industry accounts for like 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's really a pretty massive
Yeah.
contributor to the environmental impacts that we're all facing as a world. I guess I say that to say that where we're going, I think will continue to be, capitalist market-based solutions, but there'll be solutions that help address some of those environmental challenges, because that's really been the externality that we can no longer ignore, that we have been ignoring for a century or more, and really can no longer can. Um,
Right.
and I'm hopeful that, through the Inflation Reduction Act, through like a lot of, new companies that are working on cell-based meat and plant-based meat and vertical farming, these things all have their pros and cons, but I think there will be solutions that help tackle kind of some of those environmental externalities that help us get to more sustainable food systems.